Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. We've all heard the same retirement saving advice. Save 15% of your income. End of story, right? But here's the thing. What if you're not the average saver? What if you're knee-deep in personal finance and you started early and you saved aggressively? You went hard, you've been disciplined, and now you're way ahead of the curve. Do you really need to keep pumping 15% in every single year? Or could you ease off and still stay on track? And on the flip side, what if you got a late start? Looking at that 15% rule, you know it's not going to cut it. So what do you actually need to save? That's where things get interesting. And recently, I ran across a table from Rowe Price that answers those exact questions. It doesn't just recycle the same old advice. And honestly, it's the first time I've seen a table like this. So I thought we could look at it and maybe for some of us, it could help us rethink saving. Let's dive in. Before we break down the chart, let's start with the traditional advice. Save 15% of your income every year from your first paycheck until retirement. Here's why that works. It builds the habit, it's easy to follow, and it gives compounding the time it needs. And honestly, this is really advice designed for the masses. And any advice designed for the masses has to be simple to follow. But the goal is simple. Build up a nest egg large enough that it can support you in retirement. And if you follow it, here's roughly where you'll land according to Rowe Price. By age 30, you'll have about half your annual income saved. By age 40, it's about 1.5 to 2.5 times your income. By age 50, 3.5 to 5.5 times your income. And by retirement at 67, it'd be 7.5 to 13.5 times your income saved. These can be helpful benchmarks, but remember that they're a guide, not gospel. Only you know your personal question. But these types of benchmarks are really what people tend to think about when they ask the question, how much should I have saved by 30 or 40 or 50? But here's the catch. Life doesn't follow a straight line. Maybe you started late, maybe you took some time off, maybe you had a big pay increase at one point, and the 15% rule doesn't adjust for that. And that's why I love this chart we're about to look at, because unlike the traditional rule of thumb, it adapts to where you are, whether you're ahead, whether you're behind, or whether you're right on track. I haven't seen any other brokerage house put out a chart like this. If you have, share it in the comments below because I absolutely want to check it out. But let's make sure to give this chart the attention it deserves. Okay, let's walk through this. On the left, you've got age. Across the top, you've got how much you've already saved, measured as a multiple of your income. 1x, 2x, 3x, so on. Inside the chart, those percentages show the minimum savings rate you'd need going forward to stay on track for retirement at 67. Let's start with the good news. At 40, with 3x your income saved, you'd only need to put away about 9% going forward, much lower than the standard 15%. That's the payoff of being ahead. And here's where it gets really interesting. If you're 30 or 40 and already have 5x your income saved, the chart says you'd need to save under 3%. That's essentially coast fire. You've built enough momentum that compounding can do the heavy lifting. They don't say to stop saving altogether. Instead, they say that you can get away with saving under 3% of your income. And the idea here is to keep that saving habit alive. This habit is what got you where you are, so you still want to stay on track. Even later in life, you see the benefits of being ahead. At 50, with 5x saved, your baseline is just 9%. At 55, with 6x, it's only 11%. The earlier you build margin, the more flexibility you have later on. Now let's flip it around. At 40, with nothing saved, you'd need to save 20% going forward. At 50, with 0 saved, it jumps to 29%. That's steep, but it shows the cost of waiting. The later you start, the harder it gets. And then there are those right on track. At 35, with 1x saved, your baseline is 14%, basically the classic 15% rule. At 45, with 2x saved, you're right where you should be at about 16%. This chart isn't about showing you the perfect amount to save, but rather showing you the minimum amount you would need to continue saving to stay on track. If you're ahead, it confirms that your hard work is paying off, and it says that you could lower your savings rate if you chose to and still reach your long-term goals. If you're behind, it shows you what you would need to increase your savings rate to in order to get back on track. And if you're right where you should be, well, it confirms that the plan is working. Let's bring this chart to life with two quick examples. Let's do one that's ahead of the curve and one that's behind the curve. The key thing to keep in mind about this table is that it's based on either a two-person income household making $150,000 a year or a single income earning household making $75,000 a year, but these numbers do flex for the vast majority of incomes. First, the single earner, a 35-year-old making $75,000 a year with 3 times their income already saved. That's $225,000. They would only need to continue contributing 6% of their pay, about $4,500 a year or $375 a month. And if they earn a 7% annual return, their balance could grow to about $1.5 million by the age of 60. That's double the target of 10x their income, or $750,000. Clearly ahead of the curve. Now, what about a couple who's behind the curve? At age 45, they have $150,000 or just 1x their income saved. The chart shows they'd need to save 20% going forward, or $30,000 a year, $2,500 a month. If they do that for the next 15 years with a 7% rate of return, by age 60, their balance could grow to roughly $1.2 million. That does fall short of the 10x target, which would be $1.5 million in this case, but what matters most is, would that be enough to sustain their lifestyle? And by ramping up their savings rate, they're going to put themselves in a far better position going into retirement. Let's add some real-world perspective because the chart by itself doesn't tell the whole story. First, this is not permission to coast. Yes, you may look at this chart and it may say you only need to save 9% of your income or less. Maybe you can get away with saving less than 3% of your income, but that doesn't mean you should. Think of these numbers as your floor, not your target savings rate. Life has a way of throwing you curveballs, whether that is a job loss, a health scare, or a market downturn, and saving only the minimum leaves you with very little cushion. So while it can be reassuring to look at this chart and think, yes, I could save less and still be on track, I'd still like the idea of building in a safety net. I like to aim a little bit higher, have more of a cushion going into retirement, and that way I don't feel like I might be scrambling to catch up later on. And on a positive note, seeing that you could get away with saving a much lower percentage should be a signal to you that what you're doing is working. Maybe that serves to be a huge weight off your shoulders and take some stress off yourself. And this kind of mentality really resonates with someone like me. I'm the type of person, if I'm not early, I'm late. Even when I was back in school, if I didn't finish a project several days before it was due, I was already stressing about being behind. I always like to joke that I don't have a single procrastinating bone in my body. And I can absolutely say that that mindset carries on over to saving and investing. Second, high earners need to be careful. This chart assumes that Social Security will fill a steady share of income for everyone, but that's not necessarily the case. Yes, Social Security does usually end up as a big income source for the vast majority of people in their retirement years, but it is progressive. And for those who are higher income earners, it replaces a smaller share of their income. And if you want to continue living the same exact lifestyle, you have to know that your investments are going to have to fill more of that gap. So if the chart says you only need to save 7% or 9%, remember, that may hold for middle income households, but for higher earners, your real floor is likely higher. And truly, it's not just about income. Really, it's more about lifestyle. So the more you spend to maintain your lifestyle, the more you're going to have to save so you can continue that spending in retirement. Third, real life is messy. Now, while I love that this chart does factor in somebody who may be ahead of the curve when it comes to saving or somebody who may have started a little bit later, the chart does assume that once you start saving, that you consistently save, no detours, all the way up until the age of 67. Real life doesn't look like that. Some people retire early, some by choice, some by necessity. Sometimes we have periods of life where we have to reduce our savings rate because we have high expenses in other areas, whether that's maybe a health-related expense, childcare, or helping aging parents. And it's hard to factor that into a simple chart. So yes, this chart absolutely adds nuance. It's better than the strict, say, save 15% of your income consistently for your entire life, but make sure to layer in your own reality. No one's life follows the perfect straight line of a chart. Fourth, the psychology of saving. Numbers aside, behavior matters. And if you're the type of person who's watching these types of videos, you're probably not the type of person who's going to stop saving or lower your savings rate because a chart says you can. For many of us, saving seems to become second nature. Even in retirement, it can be weird to make that transition to starting to draw from your investments. And I know so many people who go into retirement and continue to save. I'm not saying that you have to do that, but I am saying that this is a habit that is common among those who have saved throughout the course of their entire life. So when you look at this chart and you see that it says you can save under 3% of your income, don't look at it as simply permission to coast or stop saving altogether. Maybe you give yourself some flexibility with your savings rate, but keep that savings muscle alive because it got you to where you are and you want to stay on track. Fifth, if you're behind, don't panic, but don't ignore it either. When you look at this chart and you look at your row and it says maybe you need to save 20 or 29%, don't feel overwhelmed. This chart is not meant to shame you. It's just there to show you the size of a gap. Here's the important nuance. If you can't hit the exact savings rate the chart suggests, every step closer still moves the needle. If the target says 20% and you can only manage, say, 12%, that's not failure, that's meaningful progress. And you don't have to close this gap overnight. Start to nudge your savings rate up slowly over time, maybe by 1% or 2%. Small changes like this really won't be that noticeable within your paycheck. But when these small changes are applied to investing over the long haul, it can make a massive difference. Another smart tactic is to capture future raises. When your income goes up, funnel part of it straight into savings so you grow into a higher contribution rate without ever feeling the pinch. The key is steady improvement, not perfection. Sixth, catching up isn't just about saving more. If you're behind, you have more levers you can pull than simply cranking up contributions. Maybe you decide to work a little bit longer. This allows you to save more, but also makes it so your portfolio has less years that it actually has to support you. You could delay Social Security, which permanently increases your monthly benefit for life. Or you could adjust lifestyle expectations. Maybe you downsize your home, trim ongoing expenses, or simply live more intentionally. Each of those changes lowers the retirement number you actually need to hit. And here's the crucial thing. These targets are based on income, and that inherently makes them feel ambitious. But here's the thing. Most people don't need to replace 100% of their income. Most people need to replace 100% of their spending. If your lifestyle costs less than your paycheck, that significantly reduces the pressure on your portfolio. So no, you might not need 13 and a half times your income at retirement. What really matters is that your guaranteed income streams, whether that's Social Security or maybe a pension, plus your investments are enough to cover your expenses and your lifestyle. That's why personal finance always circles back to this. Run the numbers on your personal circumstances. Don't rely on averages in a chart. At the end of the day, this chart isn't about perfection. It's about perspective. It shows you the floor you would need to stay on track, but the real power comes from applying it to your life. Because your numbers, your spending, your goals are unique. You can use these charts as a guide, but make sure that you target your goals to your specific situation. So what are your thoughts on this chart? I actually loved it. I'll link it down below if you're interested in checking it out. Again, it's from Rowe Price. I thought it was a great resource. If you've seen other resources like this and you want to share them, I'd love to see links down in the comments. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Life doesn't follow a straight line. Maybe you started late. Maybe you started late. Maybe you... Maybe you started late. Maybe... I will get it. Sometimes by choice, sometimes, I don't want to say by force, that sounds like aggressive, but you know, sometimes by necessity, it's a better phrasing, right? We all know how I feel about beeping. So stupid. Side note, my son loves trucks. Guess what? Guess who's the silly goose who makes sure to continue buying him trucks that have sound effects because they make him so happy. So not only do I have beeping in the outside world, I have beeping at home from these little toy trucks. Soon I'm gonna be dreaming about beep, beep, beep.